So for starters, the first Division game took place in New York, as we know, with Division agents attempting to investigate and rebuild the aftermath of the pandemic. So where does the Division 2 fall in that narrative?
Yeah, so the Division 2 picks up after the events of the first game. So you're a new agent that's kind of already seen some stuff already. They've been out on assignment, and now you've been called to DC because DC has sent out this distress signal that DC is fallen, right? So you're sent in 7 months after the original outbreak. The virus has kind of burnt itself out. The civilians are barely hanging on. They form these settlements that are kind of crumbling, and you get in there to not only help bring the Division network back online and get everyone connected, but also help these civilians.
In terms of the Division 1 and the Division 2, is there going to be any kind of overlap, or does your character have anything to do with each other between the first and the second?
So you're playing as a new agent. You kind of get to go through that whole power journey of the 1 through 30 campaign. Plus, there's a new toolbox of stuff for you to unlock. So it's not carrying over from the first game, but we've had a live series of challenges running in the first game called Shields, and players who have been knocking those off will have some rewards waiting for them in the sequel.
So as this is a completely different area, obviously Washington, D.C., there's going to be different factions, which we've already kind of seen.
Yeah.
But the Division 1 had a lot of factions that people really liked, such as the Cleaners. Do any of those factions kind of make an appearance, or kind of versions of those factions?
Yeah, so there's some things that we don't want to dive into too much, like in terms of little story spoilers and stuff, but I'll say that the 3 major factions that you're fighting are totally new to this game. There are things that formed in DC, right? Those factions from the first game are really tied to New York, and they were trying to take over Manhattan. So you saw the same sort of things happen in DC, and the factions are kind of really tied, just like the Cleaners were in the first game, really tied to what makes DC unique.
The original did an amazing job of making like a true-to-feel New York City, with the map being really, really similar. And then from what we've seen, it looks like you've got the Capitol building, you've got the White House, so it looks like DC is going to be pretty true to form as well. How close is it in comparison to the real DC, and to what extent will players be able to explore?
So we started from actual satellite imagery, which is a new thing that we're doing on the sequel. We've kind of expanded our tool set, the Snowdrop engine, to be able to pull in satellite imagery to get like a true one-to-one. So I think the city is actually more accurate than Manhattan. Like if you go back, there were like certain streets we took out and things like that, but it was very, very close and felt real. This is that even pushed further, but then time being applied to that. So you start with this one-to-one this one-to-one Washington, D.C., and then what's been really fun about that is layering on, the 7 months of overgrowth and flooding and destruction, and I think it's going to be very familiar to people who know DC very well because it's one-to-one, but a totally new take on it.
Are there any areas in the game that you are exceptionally proud of, or that you can't wait for players to experience, like something that is true to life, like the Smithsonian or anything like that? Or
oh yeah, there's a lot of the missions are set in just some really amazing iconic locations. Air and Space Museum, you get to really go in there and explore it. I think when people experience the mall for the first time, it's a super new type of environment for the Division, right? This much more open space, and everyone working on it's really had to tackle what that means. So you see the AI have evolved to move through more open areas and flank you, and you just feel so much more active. So I think there's a lot to discover in the world. In terms of what I've had like direct impact on, I'm super proud of DZ South that we revealed a few weeks ago, and it's just super dense, tons of interiors, and this layer of destruction that just feels super organic. So yeah, there's a lot for players to discover.
In the Division, we fought everything from like armored vehicles to helicopters. Are there any special enemies you can tell us about or tease for the Division 2?
Well, there's a little tease at the end of the last story trailer where you saw this this enemy that's not part of one of those 3 factions drop in. So there's definitely surprises for players to uncover that kind of really evolve the combat of the first game.
One of the biggest gripes that players had about the Division 1 was that the difficulty of missions revolved primarily around upping the damage of the enemies, which resulted in players considering them bullet sponges.
Sure.
Will this be addressed in the Division 2?
Yeah, it's been something we've been focused on the whole time, and I think, in what you played today, or what you're playing today, that feeling of bullet sponge, the time to kill is much faster, the lethality is way higher, both for you and the AI, so that's been a core goal where we're a cover shooter, right? And so we really want to push you to feel like you want to make smart cover choices because the AI are lethal to you, but you're also attacking at smart moments to get the right headshot to down an enemy. Of course, we're also an RPG, right? And stats and tracking your DPS, that matters too, but we're trying to add a layer of realization on top of what we had in the first game to make it feel like authentic and real. So you'll see a lot of the AI actually wear armor now that you can shoot off. Even just henchmen might have a helmet on, so you can't get that one-shot headshot, but you can shoot their helmet off, right? So this time we just want it to feel more real and be more lethal throughout, but still give you some combat challenges.
Are there any examples, either bosses or otherwise, aside from like the armor, that you're looking for players to be challenged by?
There are so many new archetypes in this game, things that weren't in the last game. Like in the last game we had RC cars and you'd hear that little beep and you'd have to dodge roll at just the perfect moment. There's a lot more of the AI using their tools against you and you having to adapt. So things that come out in the environment and when they get close they cause you to bleed, which changes your movement mechanics and forces you to adapt on the fly. There's a lot more of AI doing elemental attacks to flush you out of cover. So I think it's not just about bosses, it's each archetype of the factions, and there's so much more diversity between the groups this time.
In the Division 1 we primarily saw that there was a shared world with people in your party, and then of course whenever you hit the dark zones it's really where like a shared world kind of felt more real. Will we be seeing any changes to that in terms of PvE specific content? I know that the dark zones have changed a little bit. Will there be other PvE areas that are specifically shared world where you'll be able to see just random players?
Yeah, so the game kind of, it has its two fronts, right? So on the PvP side of things, it's easier for you to get in with other players because we're launching with an actual organized PvP platform where you can just jump in and play some really intense, 10-minute matches. Plus the dark zones this time are normalized, so it's a much more fair experience where lots of players can get in and it doesn't matter as much about you being at the exact same power level. It's more about your Twitch skills and your abilities. And then on the kind of open world side of things, there's more shared spaces. Plus we have clans this time. Your clan has a shared social space, so you can get in and kind of explore the world with more of your friends and see how everyone looks.
Awesome.
And then the world in general is much more alive with the living world simulation. So even when you're just out on the field headed to a mission, there's just a lot more stuff making the world feel active and alive. It's unpredictable even for us because it's a real simulation, so it's been fun just like looking over people's shoulders as they're playing and everyone's kind of having a unique experience.
One of the things that they were talking about was as you kind of progress through your story in your game, different factions will respond depending on, I guess, how you treat them. Like, enemy factions can start taking over more and more land, or obviously the clans kind of fight against each other at times. Mm-hmm. Could you kind of concoct a situation where one group kind of overpowers the rest, like across the city?
So, I don't think any of those three factions are strong enough to take over all of DC, but where they are, how much territory they control is totally dependent on the simulation. So you not clearing out a control point or hostages getting executed in the streets, all these things build their power, lets them get more resources, lets their strongholds get faster, lets their area of control expand, right? And then you'll see them start doing things like setting up these radio towers where there's like spewing propaganda in the street, and that makes them stronger. So the key is really, you don't know who's going to be in a zone at any one time before you log on, and you'll open up the mega map and you'll see, wow, the Hyenas took over that name zone, and last time I played it was the True Sons, or maybe they're clashing over it and there's a faction fight taking place, and it just makes the game much more replayable because it's evolving.
In the sense of, you know, when you're doing other things, when you're in the dark zone, do you have to be in that area for that kind of stuff to occur?
Yeah, no, it's actually, it is like, you know, you're in the game playing, we're not running the simulation when you're logged off.
Right.
But you're in the dark zone. If you open up the Mega Map, you'll see living world simulation stuff happening. You'll see different control points popping up. Maybe the settlements have a trade route running, and you'll see the actual path that the NPCs are taking through the world, and where maybe enemy factions are going to collide with them. All that stuff is dynamic and happening if you're not there or not. And the civilians themselves, helping the civilians get stronger, they're out there in the open world too, trying to regain control as well. So there's a lot of clashing factions.
It was really cool because in the last fight that we were just in, we were able to call in support, which is something that was kind of helpful and unexpected.
Yeah, and that is one of those things where you can only call in support if the civilians are in a good enough spot to be able to send guys out to help you.
In the Division 1, a lot of the best weapons and armor were either found in the dark zones or obtained through things like, you know, legendary missions. Mm-hmm. What can players expect for obtaining great weapons and gear on launch?
Yeah, so I think we learned a lot of lessons on the first game and went to a more kind of even distribution of loot where the more I play, I have a chance to find something good anywhere. We're still nailing down the specifics on all that stuff, but definitely that's an approach we're pushing into the sequel. And also we're shipping with a ton more diversity in the gear game at launch. All the different gear brands with their own bonuses, lots of more talents, an extra weapon type that wasn't in the first game, the rifles. So there's a ton of stuff to find, and we're going to make sure we're feeding you, interesting upgrades, kind of no matter what you want to do, because this game is so big, it caters to a lot of different players.
The Division 1 to Division 2 has been about 3 years, and of course, the Division 1 had a lot of content that released during that time. So do you guys see the Division 2 maybe going longer than that, and what do you guys have planned for the Division 2?
So, it's hard to know exactly what the future holds, but I will say our dedication to post-launch is huge. The post-launch plan is free this time. We're not selling a season pass, so we really want to not fragment up the community into different groups, and we'll be supporting the game with not just these game mode expansions, more like what we did in the first game, but new name zones, new missions, along with additions to the conflict PvP. So the game's going to keep evolving, and that content all the way through the first year is 100% free for the whole community.